Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. This is your Tuesday Buckeye Talk, and it is our big post-summer camp recruiting wrap-up for Ohio State. Here with Stephen Means, I'm Nathan Baird from cleveland.com, and Ohio State just finished its summer camps last week, had its last big week for the summer for all intents and purposes of big official visits, and they've followed up with some commitments out of that weekend. So we need to react to that news. We're also going to get back into kind of reframing what the class is so far, this 2024 class that is currently ranked number 2 in the country, and then Ohio State is building towards something pretty strong here. And then in the third segment, Stephen is going to take us into predicting the rest of this class. He just published something Monday morning at cleveland.com/OSU that takes you through this and answers a lot of questions, but it's the intel that he got out at camps and from talking to people and from being around this year round. That's who he's predicting Ohio State's class to finish up with when signing day 2024 comes around. But first, let's talk about the news that came in this past weekend. And before we get into the names, Stephen, was this what Ohio State needed? It'd been a successful camp season. I don't know what an unsuccessful camp season is. Like the ground opens up and swallows people. I mean, you held your camps. You had the people on campus that you needed to have on. But how important was it to have some commitments coming out of the official visits this past weekend from a momentum standpoint or just from getting the people that they got?
A little bit of both. I think it was just time to get the ball rolling. I think you could probably have expected that June is visit season, July is commitment season. That's just the way the recruiting calendar has set out at this point, where every school kind of operates like this, where the bulk of their official visits are in June, and you're probably expecting some return on that investment coming in the following month. And with Ohio State, that return on investment typically means on the defensive side of the ball, where usually that side lags behind, and the on-field product is the reason why it's lagged behind. And this is really the first time in the Day era where the defensive coaching staff is all back, but also has a clear vision of what they want, and they can communicate that to recruits and have that conversation in a way that, if you really think about it, even Jeff Hafley didn't get to do that because it was year one of it. So it was a lot of trust me. This past year was the first time they could go a step further and go, okay, you have an idea of what it looks like. This is where you actually fit into it. And they got the ball rolling a week ago with Jalen McClain, the 4-star safety out of New Jersey, hopping on board. But this weekend, having 2 guys commit, having another guy where it's like, he's not going to officially announce his decision until July 6th in Miles Lockhart, but it feels like this past weekend put the finishing touches on that, and it's just a matter of him making it public. It feels like the ball is about to get rolling here on the defensive side of the ball, and to start that with Bryce West, a top 50 recruit from Glenville, while also finally, after years and years of trying, getting that 2 tight end class in a way that it feels like it's going to stick, with Demarion Witten, also a Glenville product, committing this weekend, with Max LeBlanc committing before the spring game. It feels like there's some commitment momentum that's going to continue to roll here over the next couple of weeks.
So let's delve into both of those topics that you just brought up. Let's start first with the Glenville pipeline, which is something that had already obviously carried Ohio State for a long time, or not carried them, but it's something that they built around for a long time and has just recently returned to prominence. Bryce West, the number 49 overall player, number 4 cornerback. Demarion Witten, the number 345 overall player, number 19 tight end. So what is coming next as far as the Glenville pipeline? Do you see this as being something that is now reopened and is going to start flooding talent back to Ohio State? Or was this really about hitting a small window of important prospects right at this moment in time?
I think there's a chance. I don't know if it'll ever be as wide open and crazy as it was during the Tressel era, where it felt like every year there was a new Glenville guy, and those teams year after year seem to be defined by Glenville guys, whether it's Ted Ginn Jr., whether it's Troy Smith, and even the Urban Meyer era had guys like Marshawn Lattimore come along. But I do think that, I don't think there will be a Glenville guy every year. I think they have hit a small little window here where Arvell Reese being talented in the 2023 class as a linebacker, and then Bryce West being a top 50 recruit, and Demarion Witten being a guy who might be a little bit of a developmental project as a tight end, as a second tight end in the class. That helps. But I do think that you'll see sprinkles. I think that if you're saying every other year there's a Glenville guy, or there might be a little, like say if 2026 they got 3 guys from Glenville, I could see that happening, but I don't think it defined the Tressel era. I don't think Glenville is going to define the Ryan Day era the same way, because that's just not how Ohio State recruits anymore.
Well, people have gotten like very excited, it feels like, about this
Mm-hmm.
Glenville pipeline getting reopened. But to me, not trying to be the cynical jerk, but to me, it's more important that the Glenville pipeline to itself kind of gets reopened and they start producing the talent, because it's not like Glenville was having great players over the past
Yeah.
decade that Ohio
Yeah.
State wasn't getting, that they were having like All-American players that were just going to Michigan and Notre Dame and Penn State or whatever. There was kind of a lull there as far as the players that Ohio State wanted, the players that would dramatically help Ohio State, as there had been in the past, obviously. So that seems to be the most important thing here, that there just happens to have been this group, that has come together, and presumably they'll keep it going at Glenville. I don't think I'm not predicting that that's fallen off a cliff. I'm just saying that it's been important that Glenville has emerged as much as that Ohio State has taken these guys.
Yeah, I think Glenville is just short term for Ohio in general, because that's typically where the talent has come from. As college football continues to evolve here, and NIL is a thing, and I've talked about it. Ohio State does reel back in on the national side and maybe hop on some in-state guys earlier. How many schools can help Ohio State make that not a problem, right? Because if you're saying Ohio State's going to recruit Ohio earlier in terms of not just the Jack Sawyer, CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, Paris Johnson level players, but guys like, the Mark Nays, the Armstrong twins, guys like that, where maybe you could have waited a little bit. You took them a little earlier. Well, there has to be a reason for that, right? It can't be a drop off in talent, because you're still trying to compete for national championships. So if you're not doing this and you're doing this instead, how many schools make it worth it? How many places in Ohio make it worth it? And it felt like in this cycle, as Ohio State goes a little harder, a little earlier on in-state, the state also produced guys that made that a worthwhile possibility. And how many more cycles will that be the case? And can Glenville spearhead that? Can a place like the Armstrong twins go to St. Ed's? Can they spearhead that? Places like in Cincinnati with Springfield and St. X and Princeton, can they help spearhead that? Can Massillon spearhead that? Can some places in Columbus help, like Pickerington North and Pickerington Central, start to help out in that prospect? Glenville is just shorthand for that, because we've never seen it the way we've seen it with Glenville, where it felt like it was coming in waves. So maybe it's not just Glenville, but it's 6, 7, 8 schools where Ohio State signed 7 Ohio players this year, and they're all top 300 recruits. And then when they're done with their careers, you go, man, thank God Ohio had talent the way it had talent, because Ohio State really needed it.
Well, Ohio State really needed it at a few positions in particular. One of them was cornerback. So let's talk about Bryce West. Like I said, the number 49 overall player. This was the first commitment that came out of the weekend. Was it Friday night that he committed, or was it not until Saturday? It seemed like he got out of his car and committed.
Yeah.
What take us through who he is as a player? Who's his comp? Who would you compare him to?
Man, that's a really good question. Well, for starters, yeah, it was Friday, but it was supposed to come out on Saturday, and that kind of got ruined by some things that we won't go into on this pod. But it had been trending in this direction all along, that by the time he got to his official visit, he'd be ready to do that. I'm not 100% sold that he is a outside corner, and I think that's what makes his comp a little difficult and how you fit it. I think there's some versatility there. I think he is a more talented version of maybe Cameron Brown, in terms of the idea of what think 2020 Cam Brown, when it's like, can Cam Brown be your slot in that situation? I think there's some things there with Bryce West where he can be that. There's been some 247 Sports compares him to Darius Slay. He is a bit smaller. He's well built and he's super fast. I think he's got like a 10.2 or 10.3 100-meter dash time or something like that. He's freaky fast, which might make up for the fact that he's not the biggest corner in the world. But I just think that versatility in terms of, from an Ohio State perspective, this is a guy who I think can play outside corner, but can also long-term, as Jim Knowles has talked about, recruiting corners to play that slot role. I think he can be both of those things.
I always love those 247 comps where it's like, oh, just a NFL All-Pro. That's the comp.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's good news for Ohio State. Obviously, if he gets anywhere near that level, but it is interesting to hear that. I mean, cornerback has been like such a a presence for them or a problem for them or a need for them. Something like stabilizing cornerback has been a problem, and it hasn't. There have been some things that have been out of their control with injuries that have slowed that down on the field here these last couple of years. Not even so much through the recruiting process. They're actually landing some decent cornerback recruits now. It's just a matter of getting them on the field and keeping them healthy. To jump ahead to our third segment, though, you are predicting Aaron Scott, another in-state corner, as another
Yeah.
member of this signing class eventually. So keeping him away from Michigan and getting the commitment from West, do you think that has to happen for Ohio State to call this a win, especially if West maybe doesn't end up as an outside corner? Do they have to get another clear, prototypical outside corner to make this a cornerback success for 2024?
Yes, but I also don't think if they go 1 for 2, and potentially 2 for 3, I'll throw Terrion Nichols in this conversation as well because I think he's a little underrated, and that's the point. I think there's some Jermaine Matthews there, except he didn't have to come camp to get his offer. He got a little bit earlier. That's a guy whose recruitment might take a little bit longer. He might take an official in the fall. But yes, in terms of just bodies and guys they need in the room, yes. But I don't think if they don't get Aaron Scott, it's a 100% win if they get both, but I wouldn't classify it as a loss if they got one of the two. Just because of the one they got. I think if it was Flint and you did get Aaron Scott and you didn't get Bryce West, it'd be a little bit like, I felt like Bryce West was supposed to be here. That's a Glenville kid who felt like, regardless of what he was doing, for 6 months, it's felt like he was going to be a Buckeye soon at some point. While Aaron Scott has been so much of a roller coaster the last 6 months because of the Oregon thing, because of the way Michigan has recruited him, that I put him in. I almost should have wrote this in the post for the site. There are some guys on that list where I probably put them in the category I'm prepared to be wrong. He would be one of those guys I would be prepared to be wrong about, even though I'm not quite there with actually leaving him out of the class.
We've talked a lot about the two of them together,
right?
And not that they're coming as a package deal, but the two in-state prominent guys at the same position. Is there a connection there, and does getting the commitment from West this early help at all with eventually landing Scott?
Maybe. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Bryce West did that, committed, announcing that in front of everybody on the official visit while Aaron Scott's sitting right next to him. I don't think, you don't not do that. You don't do it on purpose, but you don't do it on accident, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's the same thing with Demarion Witten. He's watching those things happen. So and these are still kids, and sometimes you can get caught up in, I want to be a part of this. So maybe that's part of it, even though that was never going to happen. More than likely, Aaron Scott makes his decision within the next 2 weeks. I think some of the dates that have been thrown out there are June 30th and July 4th. But once again, there's a lot of people over the next 2 weeks here going to be making their decisions here. So it doesn't hurt that Bryce West does this. How much of an impact does it have in the grand scheme of things? It's probably 2% of the overall equation here, but it doesn't hurt to be on an official visit where it feels like realistically Ohio State could land 6 of the 7 and maybe even on 7, depending on how some things go with Justin Scott here and then Kingston Vialamu Asa. But it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't really help that much either. It's just kind of we're in a we'll see now mode. How much did Ohio State's official visit help them versus how much did the work that Michigan's been putting in over the last couple of months maybe push them out to the forefront here, especially with a kid like that where there is a Jackson Carman vibe of or Jordan Marshall vibe of I'm not all that concerned about just playing for the home school because I'm from there.
On the other end of the 4-star spectrum, you have Demarion Witten, number 345 overall, number 19 tight end. Any comparable you can give us for him, like what you project him to be in this offense?
Yeah. When you sent this out, I was thinking about this one a lot. This one's very hard because he's super undersized. I know he's listed at 6'4", but he's really more like 6'1", 6'2". He's more like 200 pounds. He looks more like a wide receiver than a tight end right now, which G. Scott, maybe. I mean, but even G. Scott looked more like a tight end than a wide receiver when he first got here. He just needed to put on the extra weight. There's going to be a developmental path here because he's a really good athlete. I almost think about the role that Mitch Rossi had and think, all right, what if you didn't have a walk-on there? You had a scholarship top top 300 recruit there instead of a walk-on, because Mitch Rossi played it pretty well. Is that a role where maybe Demarion Witten fits in there? But I do think it's good that he's the second tight end in a room that, quite frankly, is pretty deep in terms of scholarship guys. Even after this year with Cade Stover leaving, there's still a lot of bodies in there. So there's not going to be a, hey, Demarion, we need you in year 2, or maybe even year 3. This is a guy that, think about the long-term development, just like we thought about with G. Scott, where don't let it be something in the background, and then in year 3 or year 4 of it, let's check back in and see if this guy's ready to play.
So if the scholarship numbers are abundant, and this guy's more of a project, Witten is a little bit more of a project, why did they need 2 in this class? I mean, they're losing 1 in Cade Stover.
Yeah.
Is it also a nod to just the inevitable fact that the rest of that room is kind of colliding together, and you may have some attrition elsewhere in that room?
That feels like that's been the case the last couple of years here, where you've only brought it. I mean, let's be honest here. In the Ryan Day era, they have brought in as guys who signed as tight ends. So this is not even including G. Scott into this variable right now. Since Brian Day took over the program, Sam Hart, Bennett Christian, Joe Royer. Now you've got Jelani Thurman, and now you've got these 2. That's what, 6 or 7 tight ends who have signed with Ohio State since Ryan Day took over the program. And so far, how many of them have had an impact at Ohio State? You know, and so at some point, when guys get year 2, 3, 4, whether it's fair or not in the era of the transfer portal, you start thinking about that, about guys who maybe aren't even for the Midwest who won't stick around, and how do you offset that attrition? The normal attrition of just graduation and guys going to the NFL, plus whatever guys you may lose to the transfer portal. You do that with a 2 tight end class, but also it just kind of fits the offensive scheme. But they habitually use 2 tight ends year after year. So it probably makes sense why you want to bring in 2 tight ends on a maybe semi-consistent basis, or at least try to do it every other year.
With those 2 commitments, Ohio State now has 16 in the 2024 class. After this break, we're going to go back into that list, and I asked Steven to sort of pick out some superlatives of how the stage has been set so far with this class before we get into predicting where it's going to go from there. You're listening to Buckeye Talk.